I'm going to introduce everybody. First of all, my name is Katie. This is Daniel. We're with Vaughan Is, which is like a community group that we've created just to interact more with the people in our neighborhood and community, get to know everybody. And through this, I had an opportunity to meet Emily Simmons, who is such a wonderful leader in our community, just talking about the school, Kleinburg Nashville Public School, and just wanting to move the needle forward in terms of construction. So she's here today to talk about her perspective and what she's learned through her experience. We also have Richard and Snay here with us today. And they are parents of children that are currently in the neighborhood and dealing with the transition while they wait for the school to be built. And then finally, we've got Dawn Adams. Dawn is the Senior Manager for Planning and Property Development Services with York Region District School Board. And she's going to bring us a much more informative viewpoint regarding everything that we're talking about today. So thank you all for coming here today. And if anybody has any questions while they're watching, feel free to put them into the comments section and we will address them as we can. And we'll make sure to address them, all of the questions that come through as much as we can. So yeah, we'll get started.
Yeah, so again, thanks for coming to everybody who's on the call watching, and this will be available later on as well. So if you are watching and you need to run away for a second and come back, you won't miss anything. But we're going to get started right away. And Emily, you're the boss here. So we're going to give the floor to you, and feel free to, we'll call it opening statements, but really, why don't you give us a little background of what this is all about?
Okay. Thank you so much for having me. This is my very first time going live, so I'm a little bit nervous, but excited. It's been a really crazy few days. Also, just a heads up, I have two very high energy little ones, so if you hear screaming, banging, it's all is good. It's just regular quarantine chaos that's going on around here. So I just wanted to start by saying, so we launched a petition to Stephen Lecce just last week. And Stephen Lecce also happens to be our MPP. And so we're asking him to approve our elementary school that has been promised for 6 years now. Last time I checked around 5 o'clock, we're at about 430 signatures. So this is obviously, a very obvious need and a lot of support that we're getting from this. So the school was actually initially promised to us, supposed to be opening in 2020. So this September, the school was supposed to open, but it's been pushed back so many years. So now we're looking at a 2023 start date. And that's only if the Ministry of Education approves this right now. So we are holding Stephen Lecce, our MPP, and the Minister of Education, we're holding him accountable to deliver on this because it's something that we really critically need. Now, I do want to add, in his defense, this issue does precede him. He's only been in his current role for, I believe, a year now. So we've been waiting 6 years, so he's kind of just coming into this situation. We've also recently learned that the new schools submitted to the Capital Priorities Program are currently being finalized and approved. And there will be a media statement shortly. So unfortunately, I guess because of government processes and a lot of red tape, we're not allowed to know ahead of the time if our school was approved or not. So this is exactly why we're speaking out right now. We want the Ministry of Education to know exactly how critical this project is for us. And if our school already has in fact been approved and it's something that we don't know, then thank you from the bottom of our hearts. But unfortunately, we're completely in the dark right now, so we just can't afford to let this get pushed back any longer. I also want to add that it obviously seems like a bit of a crazy time in the world to be fighting for something like this. But what better way to social distance than a brand new big school to remove the burden off some of the other schools?
Yeah.
So I'm just going to talk really quickly about why we need this school, and then I'll hand it over. So we have Kleinburg Public School, which is 5 minutes away, but they can't accommodate us due to rapid community growth and road infrastructure. It's a tiny little old town, so they can't handle like the increased traffic and the buses and all of that. So instead, we're holding at a school, Johnny Lombardi. It's 10 kilometers away from our home. And it's also an early start school. So the bell is 8 a.m. And what this means is, since we're so far, kids as young as 4 years old are getting on a bus at 7 a.m. in the morning, and they're enduring a 45-minute bus ride each way for school. And this is like having such a major impact on parents, on the children. I've talked to some parents who have been forced to pay for private education. Others are even moving out of the neighborhood because of the impact this has had on their lives. We also have a wonderful Catholic school in our neighborhood that serves the Catholic families. But unfortunately, this is affecting everyone outside of the Catholic faith. We have a very diverse community here with a wide range of religions, and we really need to ensure that there's equal access for everyone to education. So we are asking for 3 things. We need our school approved. We're also asking, if possible, to expedite the planning and construction of the school. And third, we're asking for some changes to be made to the holding school, such as changing the start time from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. and having a direct bus there. Right now, there are several other neighborhood stops along the way. And if we can accomplish both of these things, that would make the difference of children getting on the bus at 8:30 versus 7 a.m. in the morning. So that's my spiel.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. So what has the response been so far? Like, when did you start the petition?
So we started the petition just a week ago, and I'm completely blown away by the response from the community. It's just been incredible. And so there's obviously a very obvious need and support for this.
Yeah, okay, that's great. And you've tried to reach out to Stephen Lecter's office?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we've been trying to reach out to him for about a month now, and we've not heard back. We invited him today, and I wish I could say he declined, but we never actually heard back from him. So
yeah, it's definitely a tough time. I could imagine there's probably a lot going on, but yeah,
he's a very busy man right now.
Yeah.
There's a few things going on.
Yeah. So that's great. Well, maybe I'll talk to Richard for a bit, because Richard, you've got a son, right? Yeah, and he's going to Johnny Lombardi currently. And how's that been for him?
I would say the last 2 years, junior kindergarten and senior kindergarten, has been really difficult. He started when he was 5 years old, and getting on the bus at 7 o'clock in the morning, which means we got to start waking him up around 6 o'clock, and just starting to get into the routine. And then we meet our neighbors that are busing their kids to the school, and the kids are half sleeping, they're eating on the way or waiting on the bus because you can't eat on the bus. And just talking to the other parents in the neighborhood, it's nothing against Johnny Lombardi per se, because it's a really good school. All of the parents I've spoken to have really had nothing but great things to say about the school. It's for us, it's more of the system, because most of those kids, and from what I understand, I know there's 2 buses that leave the Kleinburg Nashville area to go to Johnny Lombardi. That means there's a whole lot of kids that are getting bused over there, right? If there's at least 2 that I know of, which is making it really difficult for the kids, especially at that young age. Not only that, back to the time that Emily was saying, it does start really early. It finishes early. But as parents, we have both myself and my wife, we work. And we have work full days. Sometimes we get off at 5. So they're in the after school program over there. it takes about, during rush hour, it takes at least maybe a half an hour or more from here to Johnny Lombardi to pick him up. Sometimes, you know, we're trying to schedule. I've had the luxury of working from home, but I know a lot of the parents don't. And as Emily was saying, they're either moving out of the area because of the lack of convenience, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really hard. I mean, as you said, like the early mornings, but then, you know, after school and then bringing them home, they must be exhausted when they come home.
And then they got the homework.
Yeah.
You know, there's only so many hours after school you could spend with them because, you know, they got to have some time to rejuvenate, dinner, you know, do their homework. And it's like, before you know it, they're back to school again on the bus.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really difficult for me and my wife.
I can't imagine, because we've got our kids going there, but we're close by, and the 8 o'clock is difficult enough for us to get them there for 8 o'clock, and that's leaving the house at 1:45, right? So I can only imagine that.
It's an early morning.
That's really early,
especially for, as you said, kindergarten. It's enough of a transition as it is to get for kindergarten, let alone
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, I remember when I was going to kindergarten, it was like half a day.
Yeah.
Right. And now a full day of kindergarten. It's long for the kids. It's really long. And I feel for them. I really do.
Yeah. Great. And Sneh, you also have children, and one is going to be starting at Johnny Lombardi. Is that the plan?
Yes, that is the plan right now.
Yeah. And how are you feeling about that?
I am not at all happy about it. I am actually very stressed out about it because this has been a debate in my house for about 2 years now. My son started, he's 6 now, so he started, when he started kindergarten, my family was really overwhelmed with the fact that my school, the school right across from the street, which is the Catholic school, will not accept him. So that we found really, really challenging to accept that, you know, we have a school right across from us that does not accept our child just because we're not Catholic. And that is just, I mean, we don't mind sending our child to Catholic school, but they have a policy of not accepting Catholic children. And we're like, okay, let's baptize him or whatever. But that's a really complicated process. And we're like, okay, we're not going through that if it's that challenging. So we decided to put him in a private school. And for 2 years now, it's almost cost us $24,000. We're paying public taxes like, you know, every other parent in the community. And we still have the hardship of, you know, we could use that money for a mortgage or anything else. Living in Kleinburg is so expensive, right? So we're just disappointed that we have a school which is so far away from us, which is really inconvenient. I am staying at home right now, but I was working at the time when my son started school. And for that reason, we put him in the private school, which is really close to us, because Johnny Lombardi was completely out of option for us. It was out of way. It was inconvenient. The school timings just didn't work for us. My husband works at in North York. So for him to get to my son, it would be around 6 o'clock when I guess the after school program would almost end. And it would be challenging to know, okay, if he's going to make it, he's not going to make it. And having that school timing, the fact that my son would have to wake up at 6 o'clock and be home after 6:37, who knows what time. After that, getting home, having dinner, putting to bed, like that was just like way overwhelming for us. So we're like, okay, we can't do this. And we opted to put him in the private school nearby. Now that he's graduated from the school, we are looking at sending him back to Johnny Lombardi. I mean, he's a little bit older, but that doesn't take away from the fact that it's still going to be challenging for my family. I'm going to go back to school in September. My husband's still working in North York, so it's going to be a definite challenge for our family. My son is 6 right now. My daughter will be there soon. She's going to start school soon, so it's just overwhelming. And I know that a few parents from this community are sending their children in the private school with us as well. So I know for a fact that we're not the only ones suffering, and it's very you know, painful to see your kids go through this, see your family go through this after all the hard work that we do. It's not working, and we're really wanting this school, the new public school in our area, to be approved soon.
Yeah, it's so tough. Such a challenge. And we have a comment here from another parent is a parent of 2 children at Johnny Lombardi. On our end, there's also a huge concern if we have to go back either full-time with many kids in the school during a pandemic and possible second wave, or partially in class, partially via e-learning. With over 700 children in our school, the concern with the latter is all of the kids will be at some sort of disadvantage as compared to schools of similar physical size, but less children. So yeah, I think, we've, as parents of children who actually started in the school when it was first built, it's amazing the difference. It's probably about 50% increase to the student population from when we began. And although we knew we were going to have a lot of more kids joining at some point just because of the growth, the stress on the school we've seen just with the teachers. We used to have the assemblies together, and now they've had to be split up. The younger kids one day and then the older kids another day, and all those kinds of things. And it does impact the culture and the community that we see at the school. The teacher, the principal, they're doing an amazing job at managing it all, but it's definitely had an impact on everybody. And it's a challenge.
Yeah. Well, and for all of that being said, the management of it and communication, it was a bit of a shock to the system when September came and the school was a lot more full, but it's been managed very well. Yeah. I think, the kids have not, other than seeing a lot more kids there, I don't feel like the education has been compromised in any way. But that being said, to double your population in a year is felt for sure. And so,
absolutely, I think there would be a breaking point at some point, right?
Well, and that's it. Maybe that's a good segue into speaking to someone who is, I don't want to say who has all the answers, because that would be putting you way too much on the spot. But yeah, definitely. Though, I think it's really important that, this is a really useful conversation to have, but not really a fair one if everyone's just kind of talking about personal experiences without maybe also hearing what's happening behind the scenes and getting a feel from people who are, in the know, right? So we've already, I guess, introduced Dawn, but Dawn Adams is here, and she's, do I have is it manager of planning or director of planning?
That's perfect.
We'll call you the president of planning.
President of planning. No, not the president. So thank you very much for allowing me to come on and help explain the process of what's going on and the constraints that we live with and the constraints that we have to manage in terms of waiting for new schools. So to clarify, new school funding is provided by the Ministry of Education through a process they call the Capital Priorities submission. And they ask schools to identify the school requirements they need, new schools, and we have to submit business cases. So every time they open up a submission, they invite boards to submit their highest priorities. So we first applied. We could see the need for a school in the Kleinburg Nashville area in 2017. We first applied. We were not successful in achieving funding. The most recent submission was last fall, September 2019, for the 2019-20 Capital Priorities Program submission, always long names. That's our second request, and it's not surprising. And typically we apply 2, 3, sometimes even 4 times for a school. Our capital priority list can be seen on our board website. If you go onto the board website and type in capital priority list, you can see it that way. Or you can search through the planning services, and it's under the department. So in terms of elementary schools for this last submission, we applied for 4. And one was in Sharon Elementary School we applied for, Aurora 2C, Stouffville, and Kleinburg. And we manage all these requests, and each one is important to us, and each one has value. If funding is approved, what I want to put very clearly out there, the new school opening date was projected to be 2023, and that's if funding was received in the spring. Here we are heading into July, so a more realistic date, and this will be updated when we update our capital strategy this fall. The earliest that we could design a school, go through a site plan process, would probably be a 2024 opening. So that will probably be updated this fall. So when we submit a business application, there are many elements that have to be completed. We have to look at the surrounding schools. We have to look at the development in all the areas in the surrounding schools, the phasing of the development. When is it coming online? When do we suspect that we'll see families? And typically in a new school development or new development area, we have a high yield. So any new school, you will probably always see portables go on. We can't build to that high peak. We build to the sustainable enrollment. So we look at those things. The ministry looks at those things. We look at holding opportunities, and that's a key function. How do those 4 communities manage holding? And typically the highest priority will go to the school where we are running out of holding. In my career, we used to be able to, and the funding has changed multiple times through my career. We used to be able to open up a new school when York Region was going through tremendous growth, when it was about 300 through 350 enrollment. And we typically built at that time around 500. With full day kindergarten, our capacities that we build now are about 638. So those are some of the elements that go in. So when we fill out that business case, we have to look for a long-term plan on how we hold families and hold students. And our goal is to hold families together. So when one sibling comes into the school down the road, the other sibling, there'll be room for that. And that's why you see us have numerous schools for holding. In the case of the Nashville, Kleinburg area, you'll see Kleinburg is holding students. Johnny Lombardi is holding students. Pierre Burton is holding students, and maybe prior or by the time we get funding to open the new school or construct the new school, we may have to open another holding school. So what we do, just to understand, is there's the board's role. Our role is to first secure a site, and we do that when all the development applications are being submitted to the municipality, and we work with them to identify the need for. We do the public schools, the Catholic board does the Catholic schools, and we secure the opportunity. Then what we do is we review and prepare our annual capital strategy, and it's a rolling capital strategy that is updated on an annual basis. What we do as staff, we present the need for schools to trustees, and then if they are supportive, they provide a motion of approving that. So when the ministry opens up a submission opportunity, we can submit. So the other issue we have to do is prepare, as I said, prepare a long-term holding plan to allow, as I said, families to be together. School start times. I know this is part of the issue for the Kleinburg area, is they are assigned by Student Transportation Services. And Student Transportation Services is a consortium. They do the busing for the public board as well as the Catholic board. So many times the buses that we use have multiple routes in the morning and PM. Which means they're going to different schools, and that is why we need various start times. I've just got my notes here. So that's why you see schools with various start times. So what we have to ensure is that our transportation funding is siloed in essence. It can only be spent on transportation. If we go over capacity or over the budget of transportation funding, it comes out of the classroom, and we're carefully trying to manage that to ensure that that doesn't happen. So transportation is based on the availability, or the transportation, the start times is based on the availability of busing and funding. So what I have committed in speaking with Emily, and I thank her for bringing this to our attention, is that we have requested a cost analysis to determine if additional busing can be added, or if the start time can be reviewed. So that is already underway, and we're just waiting on the results from STS. But I want to be very clear, in light of what's happening this fall and so forth, I'm not sure if that's achievable, but I want you to clarify that we are lobbying on your behalf and trying to address that issue. So a big question, and I'll just say one more thing and then I'll happily answer question, is I have many communities say to me, what can I do to get my new school? And it's exactly doing what you're doing if you can. It's attend and enroll a school. It's attending a holding school, even though it is inconvenient. But at least we're trying to ensure that our families are kept together. The ministry expects us to have almost a full enrollment by the time we are funded for a new school. So when we receive funding for the new school, we'll have almost about 500 students across other schools holding. Lobby your board, do exactly what you're doing, talk to your trustee, understand their role, and our role is to lobby the ministry, but also reach out to the Ministry of Education, in your case, the Minister of Education, who's your local MPP. So you're doing what you need to do. It's not often that it takes 2 to 3 attempts to get funding for a new school. Your community is just as important to me and to our planning department as any other community that's experiencing no growth. You have a wrinkle in terms of an early start, and we're going to try to manage that for you, but you're doing everything you can. A petition showing your interest in your school is a wonderful thing. Passing that on to the board and passing it on to the ministry is a great step. But we're trying to manage a situation. The ministry has to balance all the requests across the province for new school funding and management in terms of what's available and what they can assign. So we have not heard yet what's being approved. We are anxiously waiting. We want to get moving on the project because this is the first time in many years that in this school year, this fall, we will not have a new school opening. So school board funding has slowed down. We are still a growth board, not as high a rate as we have in the past, but it is a constant struggle trying to manage the holding schools while we wait for new school funding. So that's just a quick synopsis. If you have any questions, I'd happily take detailed questions, take advantage of me being here. But I want to say we hear you loud and clear. We know your frustration. We're trying to do the best we can in the situation we have. We have to ensure that we have to hold students to justify for the new school. We have to create a capacity. When you said at the beginning of my little segment here is there has to be a limit, and there is a limit. Typically, we have a capacity per classroom, the capacity for schools. So you'll see that all the holding schools that we are using right now all have portables, and that's part of the expectation of the ministry is that we're using all the available space and the flexible space as well. Most likely, we will have to look at adding an additional holding school prior to the construction of the new school or the approval of funding and construction of the new school. But our goal is to manage this, and you can see it's a multi-year plan, and we have to have backup and we have to have long-term plans because, again, our goal is to try to keep families together. So I'm happy to answer questions or to be prodded on some of the things I've said, but just that's what's going on behind the scene. We are lobbying for you with the ministry. I constantly dialogue with the Capital Services branch, asking for status updates, explaining our stress on our parents and communities. We know it stresses you. We know in new schools that they get large very fast, but that is as the process of new school funding today. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks very much for that.
Yeah, this is like a
yeah. I mean, I know I have questions, but I'm going to defer mine to people who are directly impacted, and also people who are watching. If you want to type in questions, feel free. We will see them. But I don't know if Emily, Richard, or Sneh has something you'd like to ask. And I know there's mutes now. There you go. Okay, you're on mute.
And no, I just want to first say thank you, Dawn, for that amazing update. We know how hard you guys are working. I actually came across an old document from 2014 from the York Region School Board where it was already, it wasn't submitted for approval, but the school was already listed back in 2014. So I know that you guys are trying for us. And so we really appreciate everything that you're doing.
Oh, our pleasure.
Yeah, I'm just curious. So you said there's 4 schools total that you're looking at for the area right now?
So the ministry, when it opens up the submission, it only allows you to apply for, I think this past round was 6 schools. We applied for 4 elementary. Doesn't mean we have only a need for 4. We have a need going, many schools, new schools are in our future for our board. We have development happening across all the region, up in East Gwillimbury and Sharon, Markham, Vaughan. So, Kleinburg is an area that we've seen exceptional growth. You can see it, you're living in it. And we know it's hard being in the holding schools, but so it is one of our top priorities. We also applied for 2 new secondary schools. So that was the limit that we were allowed to. The ministry will be very clear. It will most likely not fund all those schools. They want to see what's coming down the pipe with the expectation when they apply for their budget on a yearly basis. But they will look at everything that we send them in terms of documentation of current enrollment, development, expectation, projections, the phasing of development, but they're also going to look clearly at the holding opportunities, and that is a big component. Can you manage? So we know that we know that at Johnny we're operating about 90% this fall. We expect. We know that at Kleinburg it's about 80%. And we know that in Pierre Burton, it's going to be about 89%. So they're getting up there. It's getting tight. So this is the time that we hope we get funding very soon.
So on that note, I know there's no crystal ball and you can't know what's going to be approved. But given that, you've seen in the past, you said sometimes it takes 3-4 tries for a school to get approval. Based on what you know about the budgeting process, is there a possibility, like in the past, has everything been approved? I guess that's the first part of the question. Second part of the question is, with the world we're living in right now and the challenges that have come that none of us could have predicted with COVID and how that probably has impacted the budget and how it's also, as Shalini, who made a comment, how it's also impacting the potential for even tighter numbers in the schools because of maybe not having everybody in there. Is that in one way expected to negatively or positively affect the approval process? Or is that a totally separate issue altogether?
I'm going to answer that first, then you can remind me the first question. I'm going to say, I don't think it impacted the approval process. I think it's not their highest priority at this moment. And I don't mean that they're neglecting. There's just so many issues ahead of us right now. You can see recently they announced there's 3 models that they're looking for boards to provide: a virtual model, a partial model where students are rotating through, and then hopefully one day soon that we're all back, maybe with new processes in terms of health and safety. But that's a whole different issue that's on the table, and that's a large issue that we're reviewing right now. School board funding, we usually see when the government changes, it slows down for school board funding. A new government comes in, they have different process. So we saw a bit of a gap between the 2017 submission and the 2019, and that's typical. So I think so many other things have happened as well with COVID that it's just an unusual year. But I think I'm hoping to hear very soon, because this is later than usual. I think decisions have been made downtown. We're just waiting to hear. I think there's so many other things going on. And your first question, if you could remind me, sorry.
I mean, it was sort of, you kind of answered it there. It's just speaking to almost like a likelihood and probability based on what you've seen of.
Oh, the budget.
When there's that many playing.
What I can say is over the last couple of years is that I've seen the number of projects slow down in terms of projects are costing more. We know that with free trade projects, construction costs have gone up with steel and so forth. So it's taking more of the budget of the province in terms of what's allocated for new school construction. Or they're building, they're not being able to build as much. We used to be able to build very efficiently, and costs. We've seen a huge change in construction costs over the last couple of years. So I've seen the awarding of number of projects reduced for our board, but I've seen that happen across the province. We are very fortunate we're still a growth board. And when you are a growth board and you have a slowdown in funding, it hurts. It hurts in terms of we have to manage. So when I look at holding plans for managing while we wait for new growth, I'm asking my staff to do not only a 3-year plan, a 5, and sometimes even a 7-year plan. And that's not to scare you, but that was done years ago. We have been mapping out, okay, what if we don't get the funding this year? What's our backup plan? Because that is the one thing we must do is accommodate students. And that's our goal, is to accommodate students. And then we strive very hard to make sure, unless a family is choosing a program for a different element, is to ensure that that family, as the area grows and starts having kids, you get a peak yield, having students, that we can keep families together. So I'm happy to see those schools close to 90%, because that means that I'm allowing for a little growth next year for families to come in, and we'll probably in the Kleinburg area, depending what we hear, even if funding is awarded, we'll probably have to open a 4th school for holding, just to ensure that we can keep families together.
Great. Okay.
Sorry, and just a related question, Dawn. Do you know what school that would be if we had a new holding school?
Not at this time. No, not this time. We have to. So we have French immersion programs. We have primary dual track programs in French immersion. So it's, if you can imagine, it's a huge jigsaw puzzle.
Okay.
And we have to look at this fall to see what numbers are in. So we'll be looking at that probably in this fall once we see what happens, knowing that this fall is not going to be a normal fall.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
Richard, did you have a question there?
Yeah, I got one there, Don. Don, thanks for the information. It's quite informative. But I don't mean to be blunt or excuse
Please
my
do.
ignorance
Please do.
for that matter. But when these neighborhoods are being built and these phases are going up, there's the anticipation that new families with young kids will be moving in. Wouldn't they anticipate a school? Like, from what point does it say, okay, this area needs a school? Because I find that, okay, I've been in the area for 4 years, and if we're looking at, another 4 years, we're looking at closer to 8 to 10 years before an elementary school is built in the area. My kids will be out of elementary school by then. And that's just me, my personal perspective, but I'm just speaking for the others. It's going to be tough. I know, and to piggyback on that, when you have a school in the area, it's a community school, and it builds that sense of community within the neighborhood. I feel that it lacks. Like, don't get me wrong, like I see my kids and their friends and the other parents, and we get together and stuff. We do stuff in the community, but it feels that we're not together. When you have a community school, you got maybe barbecues at the school, maybe movie nights, stuff like that, where kids and parents could come and grow together. I just feel that, 4 or 5 years from now, we're kind of leaving out this generation.
I totally agree with you. I know when my kids were young and we moved to our community, the back to school barbecue was the reason we were so happy to go to that school. We met the community. It's not that it's lack of trying or wanting. We see the need. And I think it's a funding issue in terms of available funding from the province. And there are only about 3 or 4 growth boards still in the province. The rest are in decline. And they're trying to manage the balance of a growth in certain areas, and even if it's a declining board. Years ago, when we were on York Region District School Board, when we were going through a huge growth cycle, we had more control of our dollars. Now, as funds are limited, the ministry is having to push out when projects can be funded, and it does impact. We also struggle with what new homeowners are told from developers. This is the school. This is the location. It's going to be built here. As I said earlier, we are just securing the site at the when a new development opens. In some areas of secondary plan, you'll see 2 or 3 school sites. That third school site, the first one for sure will get built. The second, most likely. The third, it depends on that cycle of the community and the age of the community as it moves through. So dealing with the frustration by the time I get to meet you and we go through the funding process, you're frustrated, and we get that. And we know when someone's selling a home, they have a job to do as well. And sometimes they'll imply they're not bad people or anything. And most likely they have set aside a school site, but they can't always guarantee the timing. So I totally get your message and support what you're saying in terms of it's not providing that community center, that community hub that schools tend to be in terms of making a community. So I empathize. We're doing the best we can. And, you know, having you attend our school, and I know it's hard to go to the holding school, is what helps justify our numbers to get that. So I don't have an answer to fix it. I agree with you is what I'm trying to say. I totally agree with you.
John, I just have a quick question, and I don't know if this is something that you can speak to or not. But as far as I'm aware, we currently have land in our neighborhood that is zoned for an elementary school. And I've heard that after a period of time, that land actually gets rezoned and we lose it forever. Can you confirm if that's true? Are we at risk of losing that altogether? Do you know anything about that?
So we own the Kleinburg Nashville site. We own as a board. We secured that a few years ago. What happens was when a developer comes in and we identify one, two sites, depending on that, we negotiate an option agreement. They have to provide based on number of units. If there's a need for a school, we determine, I saw a question, sorry, it just popped in my head. We determine the need, and then we do an option agreement for 5 to 7 years where we have the right to buy that. And at the end of that, we typically either proceed with buying the site, and there's a whole different process for building or buying a site, but we have purchased your site, and it will be a school site. In no way can it be rezoned. If we don't, at the end of an option agreement, return that site, then it could be rezoned, and most likely it would be housing. But the school site has been purchased by the board already. So that's how sure all those 4 schools I was talking about, they are all going to be schools. There is a need for all 4 of them. It's just the timing and the funding. So I just saw there's a question, if I can respond, from your local trustee, Nadeem Mahmood, how much does it cost to build a new school? It's about 13 to 15, I'm saying a range. It used to be about 13 million, and I've seen it, some boards I've been speaking to, it's about 50 million. It has gone up so drastically. So let's say in the average in the middle, it's about $14 million to build a school. Okay, so they're not cheap. They're not cheap investments, and the land today isn't a cheap investment. They're very expensive propositions.
Another question that came in was speaking to special needs instructors, and there's a worry that they're already stretched, but they're going to be stretched considerably more so due to needs associated with COVID when schools start up again, and whether there's discussion about that, whether there's a plan to this has nothing necessarily to do with new schools, but just the staffing and the way that special needs instructors are going to be allocated with that.
So I can let you know that's not my area of expertise, and I don't have an answer to that question, but I know our board is working extremely hard, and they're working night and day right now, figuring out the plans. We have to have our plans for this fall into the ministry by mid-July, and we are talking about those elements right now. So no, it is front and forefront for us right now.
Great. Go on. Did you have a question?
I know we were talking before, and Emily had brought up the proposal, and I know you addressed it as well, of the start time for school, looking at that, and then a direct bus. Is that something also that's on the table?
So direct buses isn't something we typically do. Again, it's STS does that. But I have requested that we do a cost analysis. Is it the best way to do that is by adding more busing to reduce the route time, or is it to look at changing? It depends on what routes are available and what time slots are available. Typically, when we open new schools now, you're either seeing extreme late or you're seeing the early start schools because we're trying to maximize the efficiency of our buses. So hopefully, we'll get some direction over the summer on that, but we did hear that clearly.
Great.
And I'm sure Emily will keep in touch with me.
Yes, I will for sure.
Not to worry.
So Dawn, thank you again. I just want to add to something that Richard's already mentioned. You know, when something like this happens, like a community is being planned, when we purchased our home, we knew that there was a Catholic school being built right across from our house. I mean, I'm still not sure how that happens. Like, you know, there's a need for a Catholic school before there's a need for a public school. Like, how's that even, you know, how's that even fair for a community? It's just like, so you're already kind of expecting a certain population of the community to be in this area, and then whoever is, you know, out of that religious faith or whatever is kind of accepted in the area, right? So for me personally, like I said in the beginning, that it's impacting me. I don't mind changing my kids to, you know, having them go to a Catholic school, but at the same time, like, they're not accepting us. So that already feels sort of like left out from the community, let alone like, when kids are going to different segments of the school, holding schools, there's a less opportunity for our kids to make friends with other kids in the area, because they're not going in the same school, they're not in the same routine. It's just impacting everything harder, right? So, like, I don't know, like, so something sort of this way, like, is not planned that, you know, you expect this area to grow, you already know what the growth is. So forecasting that growth, has that not already been projected for the school? I mean, you're waiting for the population to grow and meet that, you know, expand the holding school areas, and then, you know, so why are we not sort of I mean, I understand that, you know, it's been in the plans since we moved in. 2015, I knew that there would be a public school. We're actually moving out of this house right now, and we purchased another house in the area, which is supposed to be closer to the public school. But again, if that's going to be 2024, I don't know if I want to live in this area anymore. You know, I mean, that's going to be 4 years of our lives, and I don't feel comfortable with that sort of you know, lifestyle.
Yeah, no, I understand, and I support your thoughts. It's hard. It comes down to, yes, we project, and we have, you know, going back to 2017, felt you were on the list that supported having a business case. So we know. I have never seen funding come out this slow in my career. It has changed, obviously. Years ago, we used to have a growth that we could pre-build, in essence, so we were opening schools half full. I haven't seen, in my career, schools opening where I can move 500 kids day one and know that the second year of school's open, having portables. So the funding, the rate of funding has slowed down. Absolutely. And that is different. And that creates a hardship, on the parents and the community, and that disjointed feeling. But it also creates a hardship on the holding school in terms of increased traffic, the portables, and so forth. So it's not an ideal. I can't speed up the rate of funding. And I'm not saying to lobby the ministry, but I'm saying you're doing what you're doing. You're raising your concern, you're raising your frustration. We're hearing you, and we're lobbying the ministry where we can, and you're reaching out to your local MPP to represent your community. But it is not ideal. I don't want you to, you know, walk away thinking that we don't hear you. I hear you very clearly. It's not an ideal situation, and I agree.
I just want to add one thing too, because my daughter just finished kindergarten at Pope Francis, the Catholic school that we're talking about. And I mean, they're overcapacity and stressed out too, especially at the kindergarten level. I'm not sure about the older grades, but my daughter wasn't even in a kindergarten classroom this year, attached to the pen. So she was, my daughter has a late birthday, so she started when she was still 3 years old. And she was going in the same doors as children who are in grade 8. So she didn't even have, like, she wasn't even in that, you know, protected pen area for the kindergarten. So I think, like, even Pope Francis is feeling the stress from this too.
So that's a factor of a new community. When a new community is built, think about who buys it. It's young families who just got married or have a child, or are going to have a couple more. So the stresses of the kindergarten cohort is so much bigger. Probably the enrollment of a new school opening the first 5 years, it will never reach that again, you know, in the life cycle of its demographic cycle. So you're seeing that it's the age of your community. You look around, you see baby carriages, but we can never build enough kindergarten rooms that's sustainable. So we build to the 25-year sustainability. We build to something that we know we don't have to close down the road because we look at the entire life cycle of a school. So yes, it is a strain. Yes, even the public board, we have kindergarten rooms where we go through a peak yield, and that's what we call it. A lot of young families, a lot of primary families that we need to use regular classrooms as well. So it's a factor of the age of your community that you're experiencing.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. Thank you.
Another question, going back to something Richard said, has there ever been talk of, or is there a way to try to regulate developers in what they communicate to new families who are purchasing? Because I don't know if this is your department either, but just, I know when we bought here, you see that nice layout of the community and it says future school, proposed elementary, and maybe the wording is very deliberate because that's what they're allowed to say. But as an unknowing parent, you see that and you think there's going to be a school here, right? So is there some sort of a rule, or has there ever been talk about just saying, don't say that if it's not something so people don't get misled?
So we monitor all development, and during the summers we have staff go out just to check where, when is phasing coming on, because it impacts the number of staff. And where we can, we drop off flyers, or so that developers are stating the actual holding school, so that people aren't buying and all of a sudden saying, but you told me. That happens a lot. We can't control it. We try to work with the development community, and the bulk of them are great, but it's trying to get that clear communication come out. So we have staff in the public board that is going around and trying to do that. I see a question here, and you may want to ask me about it, about that. We didn't answer Sneha's question. Why was the Catholic school chosen? I can't answer that. We both applied. Their business case, they achieved funding. We didn't. I can't answer that. Then the ministry would have to answer that question. That's nothing we have control over. Not the answer you want to hear, but it's just, that's the fact.
Yeah. It's reality. That's too bad. So I know you've made some suggestions in terms of, Emily putting the petition out and just getting, obviously communicating that. Do you have any tips on how to reach out to our local MPP and get actual response from them?
I think you're doing it already. I would say the best thing is just be logical, respectful. Everyone has a job to do. There is a process. As frustrating as that is, there is limited funding, even from a ministry perspective. They're trying to ensure that all boards are heard. But, having your voice heard is all part of it, and you're doing exactly what you need to be doing. So just being respectful and just consistent is the key.
I mean, there's definitely power in numbers. And I mean, Emily's been leading the numbers here, like getting 400 people to sign a petition is amazing. Is there more value if some of those 400 write their own letters alongside her, or does that represent the numbers in an effective way as far as the people seeing it are concerned?
So if Emily's your leader here, I would say, I would continue, Emily, to reach out to your MPP's office to see if you can have some dialogue, to see if you can get some direction. Ask them, what can you do as a community? Is it to send a bunch of letter after letter after letter? What's the most effective way? Because you don't want to be a hindrance to them, but you want to be heard. So work with them. They are, we're here to work with you as a partner. They're there to work with you as a partner as well.
I'll be sure to keep on top of it.
No, I don't doubt it. Yeah, I don't doubt it. But you're doing what you're doing. You're doing, making sure that communication is clear out to your community. You're raising the voice. So you're doing exactly what you need to do. It's very impressive.
Thank you.
No, it's good.
I have a question. Is there any other way for a community to raise that funding in terms of donations or any other way?
Not for capital construction. No, it's all to be provided. You pay your taxes and so forth, as you've been saying. It's all to be provided from the capital grant funding. So unfortunately, no, you can't raise funds, because then that wouldn't be equity to other communities. You couldn't do that.
So I guess this is why the Catholic school was built first.
No, they can't take funding either. They can't take, it's the capital grant covers the cost of construction for all boards. public and Catholic.
Got it. Anybody else have any other questions before we sign off? We're good?
Well,
That was great.
oh, Donna, did you have something?
I was just going to say, so I invite you, Emily, to keep in touch with me. I'll keep in touch with you. Or if you want to funnel questions to me from other community members that hear this or have a question, I'm happy to answer.
Awesome. No, thank you so much for being here. This was very informative.
Yeah, it's really helpful.
Yeah, I love the forum.
Perfect. Well, thank you, everybody, for sharing your voice and just your perspective. We really appreciate it. And as Don said, you know, the more we talk about it and the more push we put behind it, I think, you know, hopefully we'll start getting some more direction and response from the people who are looking for us. Yeah, exactly. All right.
Oh, sorry. I did have one last question. Dawn, do you have any idea when this decision is going to be made or communicated to you?
I am desperate to hear. I've been waiting to hear since January. We've been asking, and then we heard March, and then the world kind of blew up. So yeah. I was hoping to hear prior to the end of school, but I'm hoping to hear very soon.
Okay. And how will we get that update? Where can we see that?
It will probably be a media release. You'll see it announced. Once we hear, we will update our capital strategy page. You know, once it's, because we're in dialogue, I can let you know as soon as I hear something. You can always reach out to your local trustee, or you can reach out to me.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
I'm announcing it now. When it's announced, then it's good news. We're all going to be back here, and we're going to have a bottle popping session, champagne for everybody. Yes. A live champagne session for everybody.
Yeah, I'm going to need a glass of champagne for sure.
Yeah.
We'll be there.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, everybody. We
appreciate
your time, and have a good night.